Welcome to another edition of the Learning Journey podcast. Wayne Heinzen is my name, your host once again, as today we head over to New Zealand to chat with Bill Harding. He's currently the International Development Director with MAF International, but he's been involved with the organisation for 3 decades or thereabouts. Let's welcome him first. Hey Bill, how you doing?
Oh, I'm feeling pretty old now.
I was going to say, I was a bit worried I set that up just to make you feel really old.
Yeah, no, that really does it. That does it. Yeah, no, I do feel very old. Well, maybe I am old.
Yeah, I'm just concerned maybe it was going to be a short chat. It was going to be like, all right, see you later. That's enough from you. Let's rewind if we can. I love your introduction to MAF because you were working, I believe, as a lawyer or working in legal at that point in time. And what was the catalyst to join this aviation organisation that some people know about and a lot of people at that stage at least didn't know about?
It just so happened that I had been a commercial pilot early on, a truly terrible one, with a very short career, which made the world a safer place, and still loved helicopters and things. But I'd become a lawyer. Angela and I were big city lawyers, but recommitted our lives to Christ in a church that was attended by the chairman of MAF New Zealand. And he, being a good math person, smelt some free legal fees. And so he came after me and said, look, can you do some pro bono work for us helping out? So I did that for a while, and eventually I was on the board of MAF in New Zealand. And then Angela and I became convicted that we should leave our careers for a year and go to Bible college. We thought God would be terribly impressed with that. It's embarrassing to think our attitude was really terrible. And of course, in the course of that year, we became convicted as we saw God provide for us and saw the Holy Spirit changed our worldview. You know, it says in Romans, don't conform to the pattern of this world, make yourselves wholly available and be transformed in your thinking. And that's exactly what happened. And so our perspective changed and we realised that actually we could go into full-time ministry. And because I'd been on the board of MAF was the first mission that we thought of. And cut a long story short, ended up leaving our careers altogether and going to Tanzania.
Now, was there any trepidation? I mean, you said that you were not the best commercial airline pilot. So was there any trepidation in terms of now going into an aviation organisation?
No. I think we actually thought that going to Africa with MAF was a soft option. Previously, we had, driven a painter's van across the Sahara Desert in the middle of summer and, done a bunch of things that were just a little bit out there. And so we thought going to Africa as missionaries was kind of easy. I know that sounds really weird, but we were coming from a truly difficult mission field, the legal fraternity in New Zealand. And so we thought that if we went to Africa, we were kind of taking the easy road. So that was actually the struggle. Having said that, there were some things that we had to let go of. One of those was education for our children. Education had been really important to Ange and I, but we were concerned that inevitably if we went overseas, their education would be compromised. And so that was something that we found really challenging. We had to get to the point where we had to put that into God's hands and say, okay, we believe God's calling us to do this. We believe that He'll sort this out. And one of the things that I've learned is that very often the way that God works is that He gets you to the point where you're willing to let go of the thing that's really, really important to you, whatever it is, whether it's security or finances or certainty about your kids' education. The Holy Spirit works until you're at the point where, okay, I'm ready to let it go. And then He gives it back to you. Not only does He give it back to you, but He actually blesses you in ways that you'd never imagined. So having got to the point where we were, felt that we were willing to compromise our kids' education. The truth is, our boys, their education was infinitely superior to what they would have had if we had done things our way.
And as I understand it, they're all fairly successful in their professional fields. So that's a testimony, I think, to the goodness of God and His provision, that it can look very different when it comes to heading out to the mission field, but the provision is always still there.
Yes, it isn't what we anticipated, but in terms of the blessing that we've got in different ways, including education, God really looks after us in the long term. It's not to say bad things don't happen, bad things do happen, but I'm confident, more confident now than when I went, in His care. I'm more confident that as we seek to follow His purposes, we can be at peace and content. It's by no means an easy road. I was chief executive at a time when we had 3 fatal accidents, which have an enormous impact, obviously, on the families and the wider family of MAF. They're just truly terrible events. just indescribably bad.
Can I ask, Bill, what you learned about leading through those kind of events? Because as the leader of the organization, you carry a lot, generally speaking. But when you're dealing with lives lost and the grief of family, how did you learn to lead through that? I guess lead yourself, lead the families, lead the organization.
Well, I don't claim to be an expert in that. We made plenty of mistakes, and you continue to make mistakes even when the stakes are high. I think the main things I've learned around that are just how to behave in bereavement, not seeing leadership as fixing stuff, understanding that the way to deal with trauma and loss is being there, making sure that people understand your love and concern much more than your brilliant solutions to pave the way to fix stuff. Being truly present with people that are grieving is much more useful than having a great strategy for how to plan the next day. Having said that, during those crises, there were certain people in the organisation that just had a real gift of working really well in crisis. Having people like that around, having people that are good with a one-on-one interaction, all those things are important. I think recognising your own strengths and weaknesses is really important. And, I know that there are a bunch of people that are just way smarter than me in different areas, and just making sure that we're all headed in the same direction is about all you can do as a leader.
Yeah. I wonder if you could maybe share, and I love what you've said there, if there's maybe like some leadership tips. Say there's someone that's come into the organisation, they've just stepped into a new leadership position, or there's someone that's been with MAF for quite some time, but now, they've been promoted to a position that involves some kind of leadership. Are there like a couple of keys that you've grabbed hold of that have helped you through, your time leading in different areas within the organisation?
I think that it is really important to recognise that everybody that you meet is a bunch smarter than you are in some area or other. It may not work the PSO. If it's a homeless person on the street, it may not be immediately obvious that they are a world expert in something. For me, that it's important to recognise that everybody is my superior in some way or other, and listening to them well enough to find out what those areas are and to give them freedom and authority to work in the areas where they're really good. That's the key. But that requires a bit of listening, and not all of us are that good at that. There'd be a fair few people would say that I'm not that great at listening either, so I'm on a learning curve when it comes to listening. But it is really key to ensure that you're creating the space for the people around you to do stuff, not see yourself as the one that has to do everything.
So let's journey through Bill Harding's journey. You touched on earlier that left New Zealand, went to work in Tanzania. As I understand it, the journey was then to Kenya, then it was to England, then it was to Australia, and then it was back to New Zealand where you find yourself now. Couple of things I want to know. I love observing people, and I get a sense that you're a very good observer of people as well. So I want to know, across those different countries and roles that you've been in, what have you observed and what have you learned about people, generally speaking?
That we grossly underestimate how much our cultural background affects the way we see the world. I have to confess that because of my cultural background, which was coming from a rich country, I had a quite colonial view of mission. So I had this kind of arrogant idea that I was going to make sacrifices, go somewhere, and they would benefit marvelously from my willingness to do this. I think that's just really arrogant. What happened was, when I got to Africa, what I found there were people that were living an authentic Christian life that I only ever talked about. They were the real deal. And I learned so much from them. Because we are so focused on the trappings of life, the wealth and education, blah, 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 we think those are the things that matter. And then when I got to Africa, discovered that actually there's a whole bunch of other things that matter, and I was surrounded by people that handled them in a more Christ-like way than I ever did. You learn from people in wonderful new ways. And for me, the greatest blessings of service with MAF is you get to work with some phenomenal people inside MAF and outside MAF. So inside MAF, you've got all these different nationalities with different perspectives and different takes on things, and we feel that we've made a big sacrifice to go and live in Africa, whereas the Africans look at us and see us as really rich. And so when we do not behave in a really overtly generous way, they quite reasonably look at us and think, well, not very Christian in the way they operate. They're not sharing everything they've got. Whereas we're thinking we're fabulous. We're thinking we've done a terrific job of sacrificing things. By comparison to a collectivist community where sharing is so critical, well, actually, we don't look that Christian. Your different backgrounds lead to different places and impact your understanding of mission and your understanding of God eventually if your ears are open.
So with your current role, International Development Director, you're working a lot with Abdil David in terms of expanding MAF's presence in a lot of Asian countries. How is that different than working, say, when you're in Africa that we've just touched on, being in Australia, New Zealand, England? How is the Asian context very different culturally?
I think there's a lot of things about cultures that you can learn. You can come to expect people will approach things in a different way, but you still just get it wrong because you just don't know what you don't know. So I've been stumbling around Asia, offending people left and right, saying the wrong thing, and depending on the grace of lovely Christian people and non-Christian people all over Asia for the last decade. The main difference is that we are going into Asia for the purpose of finding resources. So we are going in capitalizing on a shift in mindset from the Asian countries being recipients of mission to being the senders. So the reality is that most of the missionaries in the world are coming from Africa and Asia now. It's no longer us going to them and bringing something special that they need. It's Africans going to Asia. It's Africans going to Africa. It's everybody to everywhere. And I think that's a fabulous thing. I should point out that I do have two roles. I've got a slightly less interesting one, and that is head of legal services. So I never quite gave up my legal work. So we have a small team of part-time lawyers in MAF. And we work on things that are happening around the world, whether it's a charter agreement with an aid agency in South Sudan or an employment problem in Mongolia or a tax issue in Bangladesh or whatever it is. We help leadership out with advice, and there's always some kind of entertainment in the legal world, but perhaps less interesting than the other role.
How do you reflect on 30 years, Bill? 1994, you kind of shared you joined MAF, and I'm curious if you thought in 30 years' time, I'll still be with MAF, or if you thought it was just a short-term thing.
No, absolutely not. At the time, our assumption was that when our oldest son got to high school age, we would be back in New Zealand. That came and went, and we were, by that stage, we were in England and I was the CEO, and there was lots of challenges, lots of things ahead of us. And so I've stayed in MAF because I've never actually lost any passion for it. It's been a while since I've been sitting in airplanes and going out to meet the people that are benefiting from MAF's work. I think the last time was, 2016 in Nepal after the earthquake. But you only need a couple. You only need to meet a woman whose child has been saved through a medevac flight, or to see an evangelistic rally where people are committing their lives to Christ because of a team that we've flown in. Or, I was there in Somalia when an old guy that had been towed with a rope around his waist for 30 days to get to this place in the desert where we flew in a bunch of eye surgeons from Christopher Blinder Mission, and they did cataract surgery. And I was there when the guy took his eye patches off and had his sight back for the first time in 20 odd years because the Christians had come. They had no concept of Christianity at all, other than it's a group of people you go to get your sight back. You only need a few experiences like that to have enough passion to run for another 25 years. I have no trouble getting out of bed in the morning and putting in a day's work for MAF because I just think God is using us to do terrific stuff. And we as an organisation are learning and developing, and we've got so much distance to go. I think particularly in our response to what I described before is that everyone everywhere, that requires a lot of shift in our thinking. It requires a shift to a mindset of empowerment and capacity building and moving away from being a European organisation, which is what we've been for 78 years. That isn't an easy thing. that's a major challenge for us.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had some thoughts on how, not necessarily we complete that, but how do we continue to make sure as an organisation that is our mindset, that there is this transition in terms of what the church, the global church looks like, and how the gospel is being shared across borders. So how does MAF as an organisation continue to make sure that we're not Eurocentric, I guess, if that makes sense?
Yeah. If we are Eurocentric, we will die, because obviously the church is shrinking and the nature of mission is becoming more internal in those countries. So we either embrace the majority of the sending mission world, or we're not going to last another 75 years. And that's easy to say and hard to do, because we have historic ways of doing things. We are in a highly technical mission. So, it's a very technical thing that we do, and it's traditionally a European technology and thought process and things to make it work well. We've got to grapple with that, because unless we are staffed and led by Asians and Africans into the future, we are simply not going to have the capacity to have the impact that we believe God's called us to have, because there just aren't enough. It's just not enough people. That's both a challenge. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity. It's also a great challenge.
So are you excited about the future of MAF? Obviously challenges. You've addressed that there are challenges.
I am. I think a shift away from we are bringing something special to help others to, we are a part in a work that a wide variety of people are doing, and the body of Christ is a great shift. The idea that we need to get more into training, that we need to get more into capacity building, that we need to change our ways to move away from being quite so European in our attitudes and processes. That's all great stuff. I think that brings us closer to being a truly unified part of the body of Christ.
Well, Bill, 20 minutes goes really, really quickly, and we are almost out of time. I want to ask one final question, but I hope it doesn't get you into trouble, and I hope it doesn't get me into trouble. Let me just preface it by saying that
I've been in a fair amount from time to time. You'll have to try really hard to get me into real trouble.
All right, well, they're good. That puts me at ease a little bit. I just really want to talk about what it's like working with your spouse, because there are many families in MAF where husband and wife are together working in an office or working in a program. Are there some things that you've learned working with Angela across the years that might be beneficial, for even a new family that maybe is heading out to program this year, and they've got to navigate not only how do I fulfill my role, but how do I actually work together with my spouse?
I think just being clear on expectations is the main thing. Because we are so passionate about what we're doing, because the needs are often really obvious and you're really passionate about them, there's often a risk that we can just plow on and do more and more and more, and risk compromising our relationship and compromising our, a bunch of other things, including time with kids and other things. So very early on, Ange and I just negotiated just a few basic rules. I think at the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned something about being away 25% of the time. Well, that wasn't actually a negotiated rule. So we said, I won't be away more than 25% of the time. When I am away, I'll try and be away during week times rather than weekends, when you've got 4 sons, it gets pretty intense at home. Just being overt about negotiating some of that stuff, that helped. We are in a funny role reversal now, because she's in a new role and an important role, and so she's developing things and she's wildly passionate about it. And so I'm now the one that's saying, your work-life balance may just be a little bit out of whack. You started at 4:30 this morning and it's 10:30 at night. Have you considered that you might be overdoing it? We're laughing because she's been having that conversation with me for the last 30 years, and now I'm talking to her about it. But yeah, I think that if you've got a relationship that's based on equality and humility in your normal life, that you can work together very comfortably.
Some great advice there. And I will just say, I'm hoping to have Angela on the podcast later this year sometime. So she may very well get a writer reply, but we'll address that then.
You'll say something completely different just to humiliate me.
Hey, Bill Harding, thank you so much for joining us on the learning journey. It's been great chatting to you. I kind of feel like we've just scratched the surface, but sadly we're out of time. But I just want to say thanks for joining us.
Cheers. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again to International Development Director and Head of Legal Services, Bill Harding, for joining us on the learning journey today. I love that after 30 years with MAF, Bill is still as passionate as he was when he first joined the organisation. And we'd love you to be passionate about your personal development by learning something new today on Elevate. Our online learning platform has hundreds of courses on topics like time management, decision-making, active listening, and many more available to help you reach your full potential. Now, on the next episode of the podcast, we head to South Sudan and chat with Josephine Brandstrom, who shares how tennis, amongst other things, helped her navigate a new country and culture.